who are on fire.
Don't look, Sarah. Keep looking at me, baby.
The Last of Us is a story-driven third-person action game which was published by Sony Entertainment and developed by Naughty Dog, who at the time were best known for their Uncharted series. It was developed over the course of 3 years, eventually releasing for the PS3 in mid-2013. Then just 1 year later, a remastered version of the game would be released on the PS4, this time packaged with the short DLC Left Behind. Now, this game really blew me away when it was initially launched, but with The Last of Us 2 release right around the corner, I thought it'd be a great time to boot up the original again. So is it just nostalgia, or does The Last of Us still stand up as a masterpiece all these years later? I don't know, let's find out. So first up, let's look at the gameplay. You play as Joel, who's an emotionally damaged, rugged dad type who's tasked with escorting a girl named Ellie through a post-apocalyptic world 20 years after a fungal infection has turned most people into violent, raging monsters. Now, they're a bit like the zombies in 28 Days Later, as they're fast, aggressive, and always looking to beat that ass. The other monsters you meet along the way being the other humans that are just trying to survive. To help deal with these threats, you've got a lot of tools in your arsenal. Through the game, you'll gain access to a large assortment of guns, initially starting with just a pistol, but soon you'll have a revolver, shotgun, hunting rifle, bow, scoped hand cannon, shotgun light, and even a flamethrower. And these can all be upgraded by spending scrap, which is found around the world. Although beyond the 2 upgrades that allow for additional weapons to be equipped, I don't really feel that the upgrades were really doing that much. And I really think it has to do with 2 different issues. The first issue being that The Last of Us is so damn stingy with giving you any bullets. And actually, I surprisingly love this. It really makes every fight feel so intense when you know you only have 2 shots left to deal with 3 or 4 enemies. It just leads to encounters where you have to improvise on the fly instead of being able to just turret up and destroy anyone that dares try to give you a little booty wop. And the second reason being that I'm so shit on a controller that I think my entire playthrough I missed more shots than I actually hit. Luckily though, Joel has 2 guns of his own that feel absolutely incredible to use. I mean, the melee in this game has to be the weightiest and most brutal that I've ever seen. Every hit feels massive and the animations are totally cringe-inducing in the best way. Like when you give out the people's foot, or smash someone's head like a pumpkin against a wall. And if your fists aren't giving out enough hurt, you can also equip melee weapons which do additional damage, although they'll lose durability with each hit until they break. But these come in really handy when going up against a clicker, which is an infected that has sprouted fungus from its skull and uses creepy clicking as a form of echolocation. These guys aren't bothered by Joel's meat hooks and require a melee weapon to physically attack, and even with a melee weapon, you might want to think twice about getting too close, because if they bite you once, you're dead. Surprisingly though, the most useful tools in The Last of Us can be found littering almost every single combat area in the form of bricks and bottles. I mean, these things are just straight up overpowered. If you haven't been spotted, they can be thrown to make a sound distraction, but they're best used offensively, as anyone taking one to the dome will be stunned for a few seconds, opening them up to be grabbed to be used as a human shield, or given a quick beatdown. Honestly, I think the game loses a bit of tension once you figure out just how strong these throwables are, and I think it could have been fixed either by removing the auto lock-on system, which makes it so you can never miss a stun, or not putting such a crazy amount in the world, because it's so rare that you use a throwable without almost immediately replacing it with a new one from the ground. You also have the ability to craft makeshift weapons, like the nail bomb, which can be placed like a mine or thrown like a grenade before exploding and ripping off the limbs of anyone who's in the area. And actually at this point, I want to bring up some of the issues I noticed during my playthrough, which range from weird animations to the game's soft locking to really poor AI. And that's because the nail bomb seems to be one of the worst offenders in terms of breaking your immersion. I mean, when you throw this thing out, it's like the AI humans around it are told they should be scared and kind of move away, but since they're initially caught in the throw radius, they're now destined to die according to their code. So they do this weird thing where they act shocked and scared, and then just stare at the bomb, almost as if they're in deep reflection on their life. Just like this guy who might be thinking, how did I end up here? This isn't who I was meant to be. Trying to kill some little girl. I mean, I know the world changed, but worst of all, I lost myself. That stops now. I'm gonna pack up my bag, and I'm gonna go find a peaceful cabin in the mountains where I can start over. You know, I think everything's gonna be alright. And outside of the enemies, even your AI companions will do things that seem pretty wacky. And I'm normally pretty forgiving about these sort of things, but these moments happen often enough in my 10-hour playthrough that I felt like it needed to be mentioned. So moving on, you can also craft a Molotov Cocktail, which functions similarly to the nail bomb, but instead of guys getting shredded to bits by metal, they get completely crisped up in flames while spreading it to nearby enemies. Next is the smoke bomb, which is used to obscure enemies' vision, allowing you to stealthily close a gap or make a quick escape. And the last craftable weapon is the Shiv, which is a single-use weapon that can be used to instantly stealth kill any enemy instead of going through a rather long animation to choke them out. And it's not like you're invulnerable during this thing either.
Keep your head down.
These can also be used to escape when grabbed by a clicker, given that you spend your pills, which are another collectible resource, to purchase that upgrade. Lastly, there are certain doors in the world which are locked and require the player to use a Shiv to open them. And these are almost always worth your while, as they usually contain a surplus of pills, scrap, and other materials. And to be clear, gathering materials will make up a large portion of your time in The Last of Us, as Joel runs around taking everything that isn't nailed down. You'll find yourself searching some fairly empty but highly detailed environments, with the only purpose being finding spare resources lying around so you can scrap together anything you can to hopefully survive your next fight. And yeah, the idea of spending so much time scavenging really sounds boring on paper, but the world building in The Last of Us is so fantastic and helps give personality and history to all these areas you'll be visiting. I mean, every single area of the game is so detailed and varied, with some absolutely beautiful scenery. It helps you get completely lost in the world of The Last of Us, and instead of gathering being a boring side activity, it becomes the reward of exploring and seeing every corner that the developers have lovingly crafted. Aside from the materials, you'll also find notes, letters, or recordings which were left behind. And I normally give these a little skim before moving on, but I felt that since I was making the review, I should read and listen to them all, and I'm really glad I did. There are almost always some vignette which gives context to the environment you find yourself in, and they really smartly lead you to build a story in your own mind, making you feel even more connected to a real living world. That being said, there are some issues with the more gamey mechanics that you'll find scattered around the world, and I think these end up plaguing the game for the entire duration. The first being ledge boosting your partner, who then turns around and lifts you up onto the ledge. Probably takes around 10 seconds each time, and it wouldn't be so annoying if it were a 1-off, or even a 5-off. The next thing being ladders, planks, and pallets. So the ladders and planks are supposed to be these environmental puzzles, I guess, but there isn't anything fun about it. It's always just picking it up, which by the way forces you to slow walk, and then walking it to the only place you can put it in order to progress. This is also the case with the pallets, which are found in some water sections. Pretty much you have to swim over to grab the pallet, bring it back to Ellie, who then jumps on it, and then you swim over to where she gets off. There are no other solutions, and they feel like they're here just to pad the game for no reason. And I mean, The Last of Us is already long enough, and it just feels unnecessary and like they're not respecting your time. It honestly annoyed me quite a bit this time through and really detracted from the experience. I think every single one of these should have been removed and static ladders and bridges placed instead. So now on to the graphics. The Last of Us Remastered generally looks pretty amazing for a 6-year-old game. Like I said, the environments are highly detailed, with all the areas feeling handcrafted instead of like some dev just copy and pasted assets everywhere. And I think the art direction is phenomenal, with the texture work and models being really high quality. And I think it's really at its best in the daytime scenes when you come across an overgrown building that has all these vibrant colors popping out against the more bland background. I also wanted to talk about the voice acting performances we get from the entire cast. The standouts are obviously Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, who just do an incredible job, but there really isn't a single bad performance in the entire game, and with everyone putting so much into bringing these characters to life, it makes connecting with them all, and then getting drawn into their stories all the easier. Although since the AI is a little weird sometimes, it's easy to find yourself super far away from them, which makes their voice lines really quiet. So I think it might be best to play with subtitles on, or you're probably going to miss quite a bit of dialogue.
I can't hear you!
So now moving on to the story of The Last of Us. The main campaign takes place over a single year, with each act taking place during a different season, with a prologue and an epilogue to round out the entire experience. There are also 5 different difficulty settings: easy, normal, hard, survivor, and grounded. The first 3 affect the amount of supplies and ammo found in the game, and while survivor and grounded do that as well, they also disable Joel's superhuman listen mode, in which he can hear and visualize enemies around him, and they also double and triple enemy damage respectively. And once you complete the game, there's also an option to start a new playthrough on New Game Plus, which carries over all weapon and player upgrades. So right away, I've just got to say the story in The Last of Us is amazing. The characters are so complex, and their arcs over the course of the journey are both engaging and touching. So the game starts out on the first night the outbreak hits Joel's area of the country, and him, his brother Tommy, and his deadbeat drug-dealing daughter attempt to escape the town. During their attempt to escape, we get one of the most emotional scenes I can think of in any game, when Joel's daughter is shot by a soldier who is there to contain the spread, and then slowly bleeds out on the ground. I mean, it's just heartbreaking and really sets the mood for the story to come.
You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me.
So 20 years later during the summer, we find Joel's working as a smuggler, and it's much colder and older. 20 years older to be exact. He gets roped into smuggling a little girl named Ellie, who's immune to the infection, across the country to meet the Fireflies, who are a militant group of revolutionaries that are trying to bring back the US government, and claim to have a way to engineer a cure using Ellie's unique immunity. And while the overarching story is about a man trying to escort a little girl, At the core, it's about a man who loses everything, including his own humanity, but is ultimately redeemed through his evolving relationship with Ellie, who essentially becomes his surrogate daughter. And what's amazing is their changing relationship feels so natural. Starting with Joel initially being almost mean to her, as it's clearly too painful to let someone close to him that reminds him so much of his own daughter.
You're treading on some mighty thin ice here.
But then as you play on, watching them share these experiences together in a horrible and violent world, the relationship feels earned instead of cheap. And I think that's one of my favorite things about The Last of Us, is that it leaves you feeling hopeful. Like, even in such a crazy world, there can still be beauty. And that can be felt everywhere. The way the remnants of the old world have grass, plants, and flowers all over them is a perfect visual juxtaposition of destruction and beauty. Even looking at the infected who eventually sprout these interesting looking fungi. It sort of reminds me of Annihilation in the way that something can be both terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Outside the relationship of Joel and Ellie, the story's still packed with these amazing moments. Like when they're ambushed driving into Pittsburgh and then have to fight their way out from where they crashed, or be killed and have their corpses looted. This then turns into a tense mission to escape the city while a bunch of psychos with some crazy firepower try to kill you. You eventually escape after meeting two brothers who are also trying to survive, Henry and Sam. And then all four of you travel through these sewers where a group of people had set up a sort of colony. By the time that you make your way through it, all that's left are the infected, piles of body, and the items they left behind, which were being used to rebuild their lives and make a future for their kids. It's incredibly dark, but again adds so much depth to the world. My favorite section of the game comes at the end of fall when Joel is critically injured, and we cut straight to winter with Ellie hunting on her own in the snowy mountains. She ends up meeting a man from another group named David, who seems alright at first, but eventually we find out that he's part of a huge group, and we killed a bunch of his people before Joel was hurt. Ellie's fallen back to where she's nursing Joel back to health, and she leads a weird amount of guys away from the house. And I say weird because where are all these guys even coming from? I mean, there's guys crawling out of bushes and jumping out of trucks miles down the road from where you start. So anyways, eventually she's captured and taken to David's camp, where we find out they're killing people and then draining them of their blood before cutting them up to serve. Ellie narrowly escapes being chopped up and runs through their camp during a blizzard, only to find herself trapped in a diner with David. At the same time, Joel wakes up and runs an absolute train on the guys dumb enough to have stayed around the house. After torturing two dudes, Joel finds out where Ellie's being held and makes his way to her.
I ain't telling you shit. That's all right. I believe it. No, wait! God damn!
Back in the diner, Ellie fights with David until she eventually gets the better of him and kills him with a machete. The season comes to an end as Joel shows up and hugs her. You get this feeling that what Ellie just went through is completely emotionally scarring, but that things might be alright, as Joel's fully opened up to her, and they've now become each other's family.
It's me. Look. It's me.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
Oh.
It's okay.
And this leads right into the final act of the game, which is spring. And at first it feels like this is really the payoff for everything you've been through. Joel and Ellie talk openly and candidly, with Joel finally acknowledging the loss of his daughter for the first time in most likely 20 years. It's so damn powerful and leads right into another amazing moment when Ellie sees a roaming pack of giraffes. It's a peaceful moment that reminds you after the harsh winter, there'll always be something worth going on for. And it's really nice seeing Ellie just be able to be a normal kid. The game also lets you linger here for as long as you want, taking in the scene in front of you. And that's great because it's the last truly happy moment until the epilogue. While heading to the Firefly lab set up in a hospital, Joel and Ellie take a spill into rushing water and Ellie's rendered unconscious. But before Joel is able to bring her back, they're captured by Firefly scouts. After waking up, Joel's told by Marlene that the doctors are going to be able to create a cure for the infection, but in order to do that, they need to take Ellie's brain. What follows is a great sequence where Joel interrogates a guard and then fights his way through floors of heavily armed guards.
Where? Top floor, the far end.
And what it feels like is that after everything, Ellie's really the only thing that matters to him. And if he loses her, he's never really going to come back from it again. After reaching the operating room, you get the choice to either spare or kill the doctors. Although there's really not much of a choice, because they've got to go.
You fucking animal!
Joel then picks Ellie up just like he did all those years ago with Sarah and escapes the hospital with her, but not before encountering the leader of the Fireflies, Marlene, and killing her.
You just come after her.
The last scene of this act has Joel driving away from the hospital with Ellie just waking up. Joel lies to her about the reason they left, telling her there are plenty of other kids like her and that the cure was going to be impossible. The epilogue takes place a little bit later as Joel and Ellie hike towards their new home at Tommy's Dam. Again, you play as Ellie while Joel talks about Sarah and how much they would have liked each other. The game closes on this.
Swear to me that everything that you've said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
Okay.
It's just absolutely perfect, and I know in a few months, or even years, when I forget about the things I dislike about this game, what I'll remember is the incredible story, which has moved me every time I played it. So the last piece of story to touch on is the DLC Left Behind, which is packaged with a remastered version of the game. So this DLC takes place during the winter, with Ellie still taking care of Joel and finding shelter in an abandoned mall. We also get flashbacks to the day that Ellie and her best friend Riley were attacked and infected in a mall back in Boston. I really like the additional character building we get, and the gameplay is pretty interesting, as it's mostly comprised of these one-off game modes where Ellie and Riley do different activities around the mall, like telling an endless stream of jokes.
The midget psychic escaped prison. He was a small medium at large.
Taking pictures in a photo booth, and playing with water guns.
Oh, you're gonna pay for that.
The whole experience takes around 2 hours to complete, and overall I really enjoyed it and was happy that Naughty Dog was trying out some really different stuff to tell a fun and ultimately tragic story. So after playing through The Last of Us again after so many years, I find myself a bit more mixed than I was previously. Again, the story is just amazing, with so many very human moments. Character progression and arcs that we get through the changing seasons are touching and left me just as excited and hopeful as they did the first time. However, with the repetitive, unimaginative, gamey padding still fresh in my mind, I've got to say if we see as many ladders, planks, and wood pallets in Part 2, I'm going to be pissed. Overall though, The Last of Us fully deserves its place as one of the best games of an entire console generation, and if you haven't played it, you owe it to yourself to experience it. So for my final score, I'm going to go ahead and give The Last of Us 2 ear-to-ear grins.
Here they come.